The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of a distant highway. A dark sedan skidded to a sudden halt, its headlights flashing cold against the wet asphalt. Inside, Richard gripped the steering wheel, his face hard, his lips pressed into a line that showed no remorse. With a rough tug, he yanked open the back door and pulled Max, the loyal dog, from the seat. Max whimpered, his brown eyes wide with confusion, his body trembling under the cold drizzle. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her voice quivering as she said, "Richard, don't do this." He ignored her plea, dragging Max toward the edge of the road. The dog resisted, paws scraping against the gravel, heart pounding as betrayal sank deep. Richard said, "I've had enough of this useless mutt." He shoved Max into the darkness, and the sedan roared away, leaving only red taillights that faded into the distance. Max stood frozen, rain soaking into his fur, his scarred coat glistening under the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. He howled, a desperate cry that echoed into the night, unanswered and broken, his voice swallowed by the storm. Max wandered along the edge of the highway, his paws sinking into the soaked gravel. His howl faded into whimpers, each step heavy with fear. Cars sped past, their lights flashing without pause, their engines drowning his cries. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind, her protest ringing like a fragile lifeline he had lost. Max said, "Where are you going? Why did you leave me?" His scar burned with memory, each drop of rain washing away warmth. A gust of wind pushed him back, but his trembling body moved forward. A broken collar hung loosely on his neck, swinging with each step. The darkness ahead was endless, yet Max's eyes searched for the vanished red lights, hoping Richard would return. The night deepened, and Max stumbled toward an underpass, his body shivering with cold. Water dripped from the concrete above, pooling near his paws. He pressed his nose to the ground, sniffing for traces of home. The sound of cars overhead thundered like distant storms. Max said, "Don't forget me. I'm still here." His eyes gleamed with both fear and longing as shadows danced around him. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but the sharper pain came from betrayal, etched deeper than any wound. Max curled against a wall, his damp fur sticking to the rough surface. The rain's rhythm became a cruel lullaby, keeping sleep away. His ears twitched at distant footsteps, but no one came. Shadows stretched long, reaching out like hands that offered nothing. Max said, "I'm cold, but I'll wait." His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths as loneliness wrapped tighter around him. He dreamed of warm hands and laughter, yet all he found was the echo of silence. The storm raged on, and Max lifted his head toward the sky. Lightning cracked, illuminating his silhouette against the bleak night. His howl rose again, desperate yet strong, a plea that tore through the rain. The sound echoed across the empty underpass, fading into the distance. Max said, "Please hear me." His body shook, but his spirit clung to hope, even in betrayal's shadow. The night offered no answer, only the endless roar of rain and thunder. Dawn crept slowly, painting the gray sky with pale streaks of gold, and Max shivered as the morning chill settled deep into his soaked fur. His body ached from the storm, his paws raw from the gravel, yet his eyes carried a quiet yearning that refused to die. He remembered Sarah's face, her trembling voice whispering, "Don't do this," like a prayer now lost in the roar of memory. Max whimpered softly, curling tighter beneath the crumbling overpass wall. He imagined the warmth of her hand, the kindness in her gaze, and wondered if she ever thought of him now. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, louder than the thunder had been, and still he pressed his nose against the earth as if scent alone could lead him back. "I belonged once," Max said in his heart, his voice breaking into the morning silence. His tail, still damp and heavy, twitched faintly as hope flickered like the weak sunrise beyond the storm. Max lifted his head, ears pricked at the sound of a distant child's laughter carried faintly on the breeze. His heart quickened, memory striking sharp, a backyard, a ball tossed high, and his paws racing after it. He saw the child's smile, heard the clap of tiny hands, and the warmth of belonging filled him for a fleeting moment. Then the memory fractured, drowned by the image of Richard's hand shoving him into the storm. Max whimpered, pressing his nose into his paws, the ache of betrayal heavier than his hunger. He whispered in his heart, "I was theirs once. I gave everything." His eyes, tired but unbroken, scanned the horizon as if searching for that laughter to return. The morning sun broke higher, shadows stretching long, reminding him he was alone. Yet in his gaze lingered a stubborn flicker, the flame of loyalty that cruelty could not smother. By midday, the highway had grown louder, but none slowed for the trembling figure beside the road. Max staggered to his feet, ribs visible beneath his damp coat, his scar a mark of survival, etched into his face. The sun offered little comfort, its light harsh against his weary frame. Cars rushed past and he stepped forward, tail low, eyes pleading with every blur of metal that sped away. He remembered Sarah's soft eyes again, the way her lips trembled when she said, "Richard, please stop." Her voice was the thread of hope that kept him walking now, even as the world rushed by indifferent. Max whispered within himself, "I can be loved. I can belong." His paws pressed into the hot asphalt, each step fragile yet determined, each breath a silent vow against despair. Exhaustion forced Max into the shade of a lone tree by the roadside, its branches whispering faintly in the hot wind. He collapsed onto dry earth, his chest rising with shallow breaths, eyes half closed in weariness. In dreams he saw Sarah kneeling, her hands reaching toward him, her voice tender as she whispered, "You're safe now." The dream felt real, and for a moment he believed. His body twitched as if running toward her, tail faintly thumping the ground in hope. But the wind shifted, carrying the sharp smell of rubber and gasoline, dragging him back into the present. He opened his eyes, staring at the endless road, his heart torn between despair and fragile belief. "Don't forget me," Max thought, his gaze unwavering. The world spun fast around him, but his soul clung stubbornly to the possibility of love. As the sun dipped low, casting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, Max found himself staring at the horizon with wide, searching eyes. The day had drained him, but his spirit refused surrender. His ears twitched at the sound of distant voices, travelers walking on the far side of the road. He stood, legs trembling, tail low, his gaze steady with yearning. In that fragile moment, he remembered his younger days, the joyous runs across open fields, the laughter of a family that once cherished him. His chest heaved with silent words. "Please see me. Please save me." The colors of sunset painted his scarred face, a portrait of pain and loyalty entwined. The world seemed vast and uncaring, but within him still burned the belief that love would find him again. The third day without food clawed at Max's belly as he limped through the alleys of a small town, his paws raw against cracked pavement. The smell of fried food drifted from a diner, pulling him closer despite the sting of rejection waiting beyond. A man stepped outside, tossing scraps into a bin, but when Max approached with his tail low and eyes pleading, the man shouted, "Get away, mutt!" A boot kicked the dirt, sending gravel scattering across Max's paws. He yelped, retreating with ears flat, heart pounding as humiliation seared deeper than hunger. Shadows lengthened across the alley, and the sound of laughter from inside the diner cut sharp, reminding him of the family joy he once knew. Max whispered in his heart, "Why do they all turn away?" His ribs showed stark under his wet fur, but even in defeat, his eyes carried a flame that would not die. Night fell, and Max wandered toward a row of houses, windows glowing warmly against the cold air. He paused before one yard where children's laughter echoed faintly, memories flooding of days chasing balls in sunlit grass. He pressed his nose against the fence, his heart aching as shadows of small hands flickered across curtains. A woman's voice called cheerfully inside, "Dinner's ready," and the warmth spilled like light through cracks in wood. Max whimpered softly, tail flicking with fragile hope, but a sharp bark from another dog inside sent him stumbling back. His eyes glistened with both longing and pain as he whispered in silence, "I just want to belong again." The stars blinked above, cold and distant, and he turned away, his frame small against the vast darkness of the street. Rain returned with fury, pounding against rooftops and streets, as Max sought shelter beneath a rusted dumpster. Water pooled quickly, soaking his fur, his body trembling with exhaustion. He heard footsteps approach, a group of teenagers laughing under umbrellas. One boy spotted Max and sneered, "Look at that ugly stray." A rock flew, striking the ground near his paws, sending him deeper into the shadows. Max whimpered, but made no sound, eyes wide with both fear and endurance. His scar caught the brief glimmer of a street lamp, a mark of pain and survival. "Why must they hate me?" his heart cried, though he pressed himself tighter against the cold metal. The rain poured harder, drowning his scent and his spirit alike, yet his gaze still searched through the storm for kindness that never came. By dawn, Max stumbled into an abandoned lot, his legs trembling, body weak from hunger and cold. The cracked ground stretched wide, littered with broken glass and weeds, offering no comfort. He collapsed near a rusted fence, chest heaving, and memories returned uninvited. The warmth of a hand, the soft call of his name, the thrill of running free. Now, silence replaced it all, cruel and endless. A crow perched nearby, its wings spreading with a harsh caw, as if mocking his fall. Max closed his eyes, whispering in silence, "I am still here." His scar itched in the rising sun, a brand of both cruelty and resilience. He lifted his head slowly, eyes burning not with surrender, but with the smallest spark that refused to die, even against a world that had turned its back. Later that evening, Max heard footsteps approach, heavier and closer than before. A man emerged, Richard, his figure sharp against the glow of a nearby street lamp. His eyes cold, his lips twisted with disdain, he muttered, "Still alive, huh?" Max's body stiffened, tail tucking under, his scar burning like a fresh wound. He remembered the shove, the taillights, the betrayal. Richard stepped closer, kicking dirt toward him, and Max flinched, ears pressed flat, heart racing with fear. Sarah's voice echoed faintly in his mind, her plea still alive in his memory, her kindness the only shield against despair. Max whispered in silence, "You will not break me." His eyes locked on Richard's shadow as if bracing for another blow, but behind his fear grew a defiant spark of loyalty and will to survive. The storm had passed, leaving broken branches and scattered trash along the road, but Max limped onward, each step a battle between collapse and survival. His scar ached, his ribs showed stark, yet his eyes clung to the horizon. Then, from the shadows of a narrow street, Emily appeared, a young woman carrying a worn satchel, her tired face softened when her gaze met his. Her breath caught, and she whispered, "Oh my God, you poor thing." Max froze, tail tucked, ears pressed flat, his heart torn between fear and recognition of something different, compassion. Emily knelt slowly, her hand extended but patient, her eyes shimmering with warmth instead of cruelty. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," she said gently. The words cut through his fear, fragile but powerful, stirring memories of Sarah's plea. For the first time in days, Max felt the echo of safety, a fragile lifeline stretching out before him. Emily reached carefully into her satchel, pulling out a small piece of bread wrapped in paper. She tore it gently and placed it on the ground, sliding it closer without forcing. Max's nose twitched, his hunger battling his fear. His eyes darted between her steady gaze and the offering, his paws hesitant as if testing whether cruelty waited again. Emily whispered, "Take it, boy. You deserve better than this." The softness in her voice held no edge, only a quiet ache shaped by years of caring for broken things. Max lowered his head, inching closer, his tail twitching low. The smell of bread cut through his hesitation, and finally, he took it with trembling jaws. Emily smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes as she murmured, "There you go, you're safe now." The moment was small, fragile, yet it reshaped his broken world into one where trust could begin again. As Max ate, his ears twitched at the sound of footsteps behind them, and his body stiffened. Emily turned sharply, her protective instinct flaring as Richard stepped into the glow of the street lamp, his cold smirk twisting his face. Figures someone would pity that worthless mutt, he sneered. Emily rose slowly, her body shielding Max, her voice steady but firm. He's not worthless, she said, eyes locked on Richard's harsh glare. Max cowered behind her legs, memories of the shove and betrayal flooding back. But something new burned inside him, Emily's defense, her refusal to let cruelty define him. Richard spat onto the ground, muttering, "He'll never change. Dogs like him always end up abandoned." His words hung like poison in the air, but Max's eyes lifted toward Emily, finding in her gaze a truth that shattered the weight of his past. Emily's voice hardened as she said, "You abandoned him, didn't you?" Richard scoffed, shrugging as if the cruelty meant nothing. "He's just a dog. They forget, they move on." Max whimpered faintly, his eyes wide, his body trembling, but Emily's hand brushed against his fur, steady and reassuring. "No," she said firmly, her gaze never leaving Richard. "He remembers. They always do." Richard laughed bitterly, turning away, his indifference heavy as stone. Yet Emily knelt again, her hand resting gently on Max's shoulder, her eyes full of conviction. "You're not forgotten," she whispered. For Max, the words pierced deeper than any wound, pulling his heart out of despair. He pressed his scarred muzzle softly against her palm, a fragile act of trust born from pain. In that moment, betrayal turned to revelation. That loyalty could still meet love. As Richard disappeared into the night, Emily's arms wrapped around Max, her embrace protective yet tender. "You've been through hell," she whispered, her voice breaking. Max leaned into her, trembling still, but his eyes glistened with a fragile spark of hope. The world had rejected him, cruelty had scarred him. But here, in the arms of someone who saw worth in him, his heart began to heal. The street lamp above flickered, casting shifting light across them, as though the night itself bent to witness the moment. Emily pressed her forehead gently against his, whispering, "I'll take care of you now." Max closed his eyes, tail twitching faintly, his body finally surrendering to the warmth of her compassion. It was not the end of his struggle, but it was the beginning of redemption. The revelation that love had not abandoned him after all. Emily led Max toward the shelter gates, her steps steady though her heart raced with fear of rejection. The building loomed tall, its faded sign swaying in the cold wind, a place where many animals were caged instead of saved. Max pressed close to her leg, his scarred muzzle lifted, ears twitching at the faint cries from inside. Emily whispered, "You're not alone anymore." The door swung open, revealing the stern figure of Mr. Hayes, the shelter director, his eyes sharp, his lips curled into disdain. "Not that one," he muttered, pointing at Max with disgust. "Scars like that don't get adopted." Emily stood firm, her hand on Max's back, voice steady. "He's not broken. He's proof that survival is stronger than cruelty." Max's tail thumped faintly, his body trembling yet his eyes locked on hers, sensing her fight was now his own. Inside the shelter, rows of cages lined the walls, each holding trembling animals whose eyes mirrored Max's pain. Their cries echoed through the dim corridor, a chorus of desperation that tugged at Emily's chest. She whispered softly, "We'll change this." Mr. Hayes smirked, arms crossed, his voice sharp. "People want perfect, not broken strays. That mutt will end up like the rest." Max's ears flicked, his body stiffening at the sound of despair all around him. Emily knelt beside him, stroking his damp fur, her voice trembling but strong. "They're wrong. You are more than scars." Max pressed his muzzle into her hand, a silent vow sparking within his gaze. The cages rattled as other animals stirred, their eyes drawn to the bond forming before them, as if sensing hope had entered the room. Mr. Hayes stepped closer, his voice low and bitter. "You don't save animals like him, you waste space." Emily rose, her eyes blazing, her voice sharp as steel. "You don't decide which lives are worth saving." Max stepped forward, tail low but eyes fierce, his scar glistening in the dim light, as if declaring defiance. For the first time, he did not shrink from the human voice that sought to crush him. The other animals stirred again, their whimpers rising into faint barks, a chorus that echoed louder than Hayes' scorn. Emily placed her hand on Max's back, whispering, "Show them who you are." Max lifted his head, chest rising, his howl breaking through the shelter walls, a sound filled not with despair but strength. The moment shook the air, silencing Hayes, forcing him to step back, as if confronted by something greater than his authority. Emily's voice rang clear as she said, "This isn't about adoption. It's about survival, loyalty, and second chances." Her words carried through the shelter like fire, igniting a spark in every silent corner. Max stepped forward again, his body still trembling, yet his eyes locked with unyielding determination. Hayes sneered, "One howl doesn't change the world." But even as he spoke, volunteers appeared at the corridor's end, drawn by the sound. One whispered, "Look at him. He's different." Emily's heart swelled, tears brimming, as she crouched once more, whispering to Max, "They see you now." His scar no longer felt like a brand of pain, but a badge of resilience, glowing under the dim light. In that moment, he was no longer the abandoned stray. He was the symbol of every broken soul fighting to be seen. Hayes turned with a scowl, muttering, "Do what you want," before storming off, his authority broken by a truth he could no longer deny. Emily wrapped her arms around Max, her tears falling freely, her voice soft yet fierce. "You've won, boy. You're free." Max leaned into her embrace, his tail finally wagging faintly, his eyes alive with fire and trust. The other animals stirred again, their cries no longer desperate but hopeful, as if his courage had given them all a voice. The shelter, once filled with shadows, seemed to breathe with a new light. Emily pressed her forehead to Max's, whispering, "You're not just surviving anymore, you're leading." His scarred muzzle pressed against her cheek, sealing the bond. For Max, the fight was no longer just his own. It was for every soul who had ever been cast aside. The morning sun rose gently over Emily's small farmhouse, casting warm light across the worn wooden porch where Max now lay curled on a blanket. His scar caught the sunlight, not as a mark of pain but as proof of endurance. Emily stepped outside with a steaming mug, her tired eyes softening at the sight of him. "You're home now," she whispered, her voice steady with quiet promise. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, tail thumping against the wood, his eyes meeting hers with fragile trust. The air smelled of fresh hay and blooming wildflowers, a stark contrast to the cold asphalt that had once been his prison. For the first time in weeks, his chest rose and fell without fear. Emily reached down, brushing her fingers across his fur, her touch gentle, her smile filled with pride. Hope settled into the space between them like sunlight filling shadows. Later that day, Emily guided Max into the yard, his paws pressing hesitantly against soft grass. His nose twitched at the scent of earth, a world far from the harsh concrete that once cut into him. Nearby, a small kitten emerged timidly from the barn, its fur tangled, its body fragile with hunger. Max froze, eyes widening, ears alert. The kitten mewed, stumbling forward, and Emily crouched, murmuring, "Don't be afraid, he won't hurt you." Max lowered his head slowly, his scarred muzzle pressing toward the tiny creature. The kitten sniffed and nestled closer, its small frame trembling but hopeful. Emily smiled through tears, whispering, "You see, Max, you're not alone anymore." Max's tail flicked softly, his body relaxing as the bond of companionship sparked, a fragile but powerful sign that love could grow from shared survival. That evening, Emily sat on the porch steps with Max at her side, and the kitten nestled in her lap. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of amber and violet. Emily stroked Max's back, whispering, "You're teaching him too." Max's eyes closed briefly, chest rising with calm breaths as if the weight of years lifted at last. The kitten's tiny paws stretched against his fur, its trust unwavering, its innocence a balm to scars old and new. Emily looked at the pair, her heart swelling. "You've both been broken," she said softly, "but together you'll heal." Max opened his eyes again, ears twitching as he pressed closer to Emily's knee, his gaze steady on the setting sun. In that moment, silence was no longer loneliness but peace, a shared stillness that carried the promise of tomorrow. The next morning, Emily took Max for a walk along the dirt path that cut through fields of tall grass. The wind brushed gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers, and Max's paws pressed firmly into the earth. He trotted ahead at times, glancing back as if checking Emily was near. His scar caught the daylight, not a mark of shame but a symbol of victory. Emily smiled, calling softly, "Good boy, keep going." Birds took flight from the fields, their wings beating a rhythm of freedom. Max's tail wagged freely now, his chest expanding with each confident breath. The path stretched wide, endless with possibility, and Emily whispered, "This is just the beginning." For Max, each step was no longer survival but discovery, a journey where fear no longer ruled, and every sunrise brought another chance at love. As twilight descended, Emily watched from the porch while Max lay in the yard beside the kitten, both curled together in the soft grass. The stars emerged, dotting the sky with silver light, their glow mirrored in Max's eyes. He lifted his head, gazing toward Emily, tail swishing slowly, as though saying, "I belong now." Emily's heart swelled, her hand pressed against her chest, whispering, "Yes, you're home." The kitten purred softly, pressing tighter into Max's side, their bond unspoken yet powerful. A breeze carried the scent of hay and earth, settling peace across the farm. The night hummed with life, not loneliness, and Max closed his eyes, finally unafraid of tomorrow. His scar glimmered faintly in the starlight, not as a wound but as a story, the mark of a survivor who had found love again. The morning mist lifted slowly over the farmhouse fields, painting the horizon in silver and gold. Emily stepped onto the porch, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders, her eyes following Max as he trotted across the yard with the kitten bounding at his side. His scar caught the pale light, no longer a brand of pain, but a badge of survival. Emily whispered, "You've come so far." Max stopped, turning his head toward her, his gaze steady, his tail wagging freely. He barked once, a sound sharp but filled with joy, echoing across the quiet land. The kitten mewed loudly, chasing his tail, tumbling in soft grass. Emily laughed, her voice light, tears brimming but not from sorrow, from pride. The farm was alive with renewal, and Max stood at the center, no longer the abandoned stray, but a soul who had chosen hope. Later that afternoon, Emily placed an old but polished collar gently around Max's neck. Her hands trembled as she fastened it, whispering, "This means you're mine now forever." Max stood still, eyes gleaming, tail wagging slowly, his body pressing closer, as if he understood every word. The kitten pawed at his leg, purring loudly as if sealing the moment. Emily smiled, her tears slipping free, brushing them away with the back of her hand. "No one will take you again," she said firmly. Max licked her cheek, his scar brushing against her skin, no longer a reminder of cruelty but of triumph. Sunlight filtered through the barn doors behind them, illuminating the scene like a blessing. In that golden glow, man's betrayal was erased by a woman's devotion, and Max stepped into the life he had always deserved. As twilight settled, Emily led Max up the hillside behind the farm, the kitten trotting clumsily behind. The sky blazed orange and crimson, the sun dipping low as if bowing farewell. Max walked with steady strides, ears alert, chest lifted, no longer carrying the weight of fear. Emily paused at the crest, gazing over endless fields, her hand resting gently on his back. "Look, Max," she whispered. "Freedom." The kitten climbed clumsily onto a rock, mewing proudly as if part of the declaration. Max's eyes glowed in the fading light, his scar outlined like a warrior's mark. He howled into the horizon, a sound fierce and victorious, echoing through valleys, as though answering every cry of the forgotten. Emily closed her eyes, tears slipping down, whispering, "You've won." The wind carried the sound, scattering it like a prayer fulfilled. Night descended gently, stars piercing the deep velvet sky, and the farmhouse glowed faintly in the valley below. Emily sat on the grass near the hilltop, her arms wrapped around Max, the kitten curled between them. She whispered, "We're a family now," her voice breaking with emotion. Max pressed his muzzle against her shoulder, eyes closing as he exhaled deeply, a sound like relief after years of struggle. The kitten purred softly, its tiny body vibrating with innocence and safety. Emily tilted her face upward, the stars reflected in her eyes, whispering, "Thank you for finding me too." The moment was silent, fragile, eternal. The world beyond still carried cruelty, but here under the stars, love had rewritten fate. Max's scar glimmered faintly in the starlight, a story etched in survival, no longer a wound, but a legacy of resilience and redemption. In the final stillness of dawn, Max lay at the foot of Emily's bed, the kitten curled against his chest, both breathing in rhythm. Emily stirred, reaching down to brush her fingers along Max's head, whispering, "Rest, my brave boy." Max's eyes opened slowly, gazing at her with unshakable loyalty, tail thumping softly against the floor. His scar caught the first light of morning streaming through the curtains, glowing like a crown of survival. Emily smiled faintly, tears glistening as she whispered, "You're safe. You were loved." The world outside stretched wide and uncertain, but within these walls, Max had found everything he had ever sought: family, love, and belonging. He sighed deeply, closing his eyes, finally at peace. The camera lingered on the stillness, the fragile yet unbreakable bond of a dog who had never given up on love.